The small frontier town was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness only broken by the occasional creak of a wagon wheel or the distant lowing of cattle. In one modest home at the edge of town, a young widow named Clara sat by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes, once bright and lively, now carried a shadow of sorrow. Her husband had died suddenly, leaving her not only alone but also burdened with debts and the silent disapproval of her own family. In their eyes, she had failed to live up to her role not because of any fault of her own, but because she had become independent, capable, and, in their jealousy, threatening. That day, her family made their decision. They would send Clara away to the home of a reclusive cowboy who lived far beyond the town's limits. The family claimed it was for her own good, a chance for her to learn humility and obedience. But the truth was crueler. It was punishment. They intended to embarrass her, to place her in a situation where she would feel powerless, hoping the rugged life of isolation and hard labor would humble her spirit. When Clara learned of her fate, her heart sank. She had little choice. With her belongings hastily packed into a small trunk, she mounted the wagon, the creak of its wheels echoing her dread. She had heard of the Cowboy Thomas through whispers at town gatherings. He was known for his stern demeanor, his skill with horses and cattle, and his preference for solitude over company. He was a man who valued strength and resilience above all else, and Clara feared she possessed neither in the measure that frontier life demanded. As the wagon trundled away from the familiar sights of her home, Clara's mind raced. What awaited her at the cowboy's cabin? Would he welcome her, or would she face scorn and harshness? The landscape shifted from neat rows of townhouses and gardens to open fields dotted with wildflowers, rolling hills and dense woods. Each passing mile seemed to heighten her anxiety and her sense of isolation. Yet beneath the fear was a small, stubborn spark of hope. Clara did not know it yet, but this journey intended as punishment was also an opportunity. Beyond the discomfort, beyond the unknown, there lay a chance for transformation, for self-discovery, and perhaps for a kind of love she had never imagined. The stage was set for a meeting that would change the course of her life forever. The wagon rattled along the dusty trail, each rock and rut a reminder of Clara's unease. The cabin finally came into view, a modest structure of weathered wood, smoke curling lazily from the stone chimney. Surrounded by open plains and distant pines, it was clear that this was a place far removed from the town's gossip and comforts. Clara's heart pounded, her hands gripping the reins tightly as the driver guided the wagon to a halt. The door swung open before she could step down, revealing the cowboy. Thomas was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sun-leathered face and eyes sharp as flint. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, and his gaze lingered on her as if measuring her worth. There was no warmth in his initial expression, only quiet scrutiny. Clara felt herself shrink slightly, realizing that she would have to earn even a fraction of his respect if she were to survive here. "Clara?" he asked, his voice low but steady. It wasn't a question of recognition, more a test. The widow nodded, trying to keep her composure, and descended from the wagon. Her legs trembled, not from the ride, but from the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. Thomas studied her, noting the fine lines of worry etched across her face, the way her hands gripped her belongings as if holding on to her last shred of security. He said nothing at first, merely gesturing toward the cabin. "You'll stay, that's all I ask," he said finally. There was no welcome, no false courtesy, just a firm acknowledgement that she had entered his world and now she must navigate it. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and livestock, a raw reminder of a life built on labor and solitude. Clara noticed the simple furnishings, sturdy table, worn chairs, and a small bed tucked into the corner. Every detail spoke of practicality, of a man who valued function over comfort. She realized immediately that this would not be an easy place to live. She would need to adapt, to learn the rhythms of a world far different from her own. Despite the initial tension, Clara sensed a subtle layer beneath Thomas's austere exterior, a careful attentiveness, a man accustomed to solitude but not cruelty. He was not cruel by nature. He simply did not offer trust or affection lightly. That would be her challenge, to navigate this balance of caution and kindness, to prove herself capable in a world where weakness was costly. As evening fell and the sky turned shades of violet and gold, Clara unpacked her modest belongings. Thomas worked silently outside, tending to the horses. From the distance, she watched him move with ease and strength, and a strange mixture of fear and admiration stirred in her heart. She had arrived as a punishment, sent to test her spirit, but already the faintest spark of curiosity and hope was taking root. She had entered a harsh new life, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could become a place where she would not only survive, but grow. The first days at the cabin were a delicate dance of awkwardness and silence. Clara quickly realized that life on the ranch was nothing like her sheltered existence in town. The chores were relentless, feeding the animals before sunrise, hauling firewood, mending fences, and cooking meals from scratch. Every task demanded strength, endurance, and patience, and more than once, Clara's hands ached from unfamiliar labor. Thomas watched silently, rarely offering guidance but always observing, his sharp eyes noting both her mistakes and her effort. Their interactions were cautious. Clara spoke softly, careful not to offend, while Thomas responded only when necessary, his tone clipped but fair. She quickly learned that there was no room for pretension or excuses here. The cowboy valued results above words. Early on, Clara struggled with even the simplest tasks. She spilled water while tending the horses, dropped a bucket of feed, and fumbled with the tools. Each mistake was met with Thomas's quiet scrutiny, sometimes a raised eyebrow, but never a harsh word. His restraint puzzled her. He could have scolded, dismissed, or sent her back to town, but he didn't. At night, the cabin felt both confining and strangely comforting. The crackling fire illuminated the room in warm amber, and the rhythmic sounds of the animals outside provided a strange sense of stability. Clara began to notice Thomas's routines, the careful way he groomed his horses, repaired the cabin, and kept the land in order. It was clear that this man had mastered his world through sheer discipline, and it fascinated her. Slowly, she began to mimic his habits, learning to anticipate what needed doing, to carry out tasks with efficiency. Small moments began to shift the tension between them. Clara would bring him a warm meal after a long day of labor, and Thomas would occasionally allow a small nod of acknowledgement. He showed subtle acts of kindness, leaving a blanket for her by the fire, fetching water when the well ran dry, or quietly handling chores to ease her burden. These gestures, though unspoken, hinted at a growing respect. Despite the difficulty, Clara discovered a sense of pride she had never known. Each completed task, each small victory, reminded her that she was capable of more than she had believed. And Thomas, watching her resilience, began to see beyond the widow the town had labeled a failure. He saw determination, intelligence, and an unexpected warmth that softened the edges of his solitary life. By the end of the week, a fragile rhythm had formed. They still spoke little, and moments of tension lingered, but the foundation was being laid. Mutual respect, born from effort and observation, began to replace fear and uncertainty. Clara realized she could survive here and maybe even thrive. And Thomas, despite himself, sensed that this woman, sent as a punishment, might prove to be more than just a passing responsibility. She might become something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. Weeks passed, and the cabin that had once felt like a prison began to take on the warmth of a home. Clara had settled into a routine, mastering chores she had once found impossible. She moved with confidence around the horses, tended the garden, and even repaired a section of fence that had been leaning for months. Thomas noticed these changes with a quiet approval, his stoic demeanor softening ever so slightly whenever she succeeded. The air between them, once thick with tension and uncertainty, began to shift. There were shared glances over meals, fleeting smiles exchanged while mending tools, and small, unspoken gestures of care. Clara would leave freshly baked bread by the door for Thomas before he returned from the fields, and he, in turn, would make sure the fire was stoked before she woke in the mornings. These small acts became a language all their own, speaking louder than words ever could. One evening, as a storm rolled across the plains, Clara found herself helping Thomas secure the livestock. Rain lashed against their coats, and the wind threatened to topple the weaker fences. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized as if instinctively attuned to one another. When a frightened horse bolted, Clara's quick thinking calmed it, and Thomas's hand on her shoulder for a brief moment sparked a warmth that neither of them had expected. In that instant, admiration deepened into something more intimate, something neither dared to name aloud. Evenings by the fire became times of quiet conversation. At first they spoke of practical matters, the weather, the animals, the work that lay ahead, but gradually the dialogue shifted to glimpses of their pasts. Clara shared stories of her late husband, of her childhood in town, and the dreams she had set aside. Thomas, in turn, revealed fragments of his own life, the reasons he had chosen isolation, the losses that had hardened him, and the rare moments of beauty he found in solitude. In these exchanges, a tentative trust began to grow, each revelation a small bridge spanning the distance between their worlds. Despite the growing warmth, there were moments of vulnerability. Clara sometimes doubted whether she truly belonged here, whether the cowboy's respect would ever translate into affection. Thomas, meanwhile, struggled with the unfamiliar stirrings of emotion. He had lived his life guarding his heart, and yet he found himself thinking of Clara when she was not near, worrying over her safety and noticing her laughter in ways that made his chest tighten. By the end of the month, it was clear that something profound was developing. The widow sent as a punishment was no longer merely surviving, she was thriving. And the cowboy, who had opened his home reluctantly, was beginning to recognize that her presence had brought a warmth and vitality into his life that he had long thought impossible. What had started as obligation was slowly transforming into mutual admiration and, quietly, the first threads of love. The plains had always been wild, but that spring brought more than the usual hardships. One afternoon, a sudden storm descended without warning. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and fierce winds tore across the fields, snapping branches and sending debris flying. Clara and Thomas were in the barn tending to the horses when the first bolt of lightning struck perilously close. Panic flared in the animals, their hooves pounding against the wooden stalls. Clara's heart raced, but she didn't falter. She moved quickly, calming the frightened horses with gentle words and steady hands. Thomas worked alongside her, his usual reserve replaced by urgent focus. Together they battled the chaos, tying down loose equipment and guiding the terrified animals to safety. A section of the fence, weakened by the storm, threatened to collapse. Thomas started to fix it alone, but a gust of wind nearly threw him off balance. Without thinking, Clara grabbed the boards and held them steady, shouting instructions as they braced against the storm. For the first time, Thomas saw her not as a guest, or even merely a capable helper, but as a partner in every sense of the word. As the storm raged on, they found themselves trapped in the barn for hours, waiting out the worst of it. The tension of the day dissolved into quiet exhaustion. Clara's soaked hair clung to her face and Thomas's coat was mud-streaked, yet neither seemed to care. Sitting side by side on a bale of hay, they shared a rare moment of vulnerability. Clara laughed softly at their disheveled appearance, and Thomas, usually so stoic, allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Words came easier now, carried by adrenaline and the intimacy of shared danger. The storm passed, leaving the land battered but intact. They emerged into a landscape glistening with rain, puddles reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. In that quiet aftermath, a new closeness had formed. They had relied on each other completely, each witnessing the other's courage, intelligence, and compassion under pressure. Clara felt a thrill of confidence, not only in her own abilities but in the growing bond she shared with Thomas. And Thomas, for the first time, realized how deeply he had come to care for this woman who had arrived as a punishment but now stood beside him as an equal. That evening, around the fire, they didn't need grand declarations. The storm had spoken for them, proving that they could face life's challenges together. Every glance, every brush of the hand carried the unspoken acknowledgement of trust and admiration. What had been a tentative respect was now something more tangible, something neither could deny. The seeds of love had been planted in the soil of adversity, and both felt with a quiet certainty that nothing, not even the harshest storm, could undo what was beginning to grow between them. Just as life at the cabin began to settle into a rhythm, Clara's past came knocking literally. One crisp morning, the quiet of the plains was broken by the sound of wagon wheels crunching against the gravel path. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the figures approaching, her family. They had come not to apologize or offer support, but to reclaim control, to remind her that she still belonged to them and to ensure she had not strayed too far from the life they deemed appropriate. Thomas met them at the cabin door, his presence imposing and unwavering. Clara's mother, always sharp-tongued and judgmental, wasted no time in voicing her disapproval. "What are you doing here, living like this?" she demanded. "You were sent to learn your place, and instead, you've made a mockery of our guidance?" Her father and siblings stood silently, their expressions a mixture of concern and thinly veiled irritation. Clara felt a wave of old fear and shame rise within her, but Thomas's steady gaze reminded her she was no longer alone. She squared her shoulders and replied with quiet firmness, "I am living my life here because it is mine to live. I am no longer bound by what you think I should be." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a new strength in it, born of months of hard work, survival, and self-discovery. Thomas stepped forward, his presence protective yet calm. "She is not a child to be controlled. She's capable, hardworking, and brave. She's made a life here, and you will respect it or leave." His words were sharp, unwavering, and they left no room for argument. Clara's family, taken aback by his forthrightness, exchanged uneasy glances. The cowboy who had once been silent and distant was now the shield that defended her independence. In that moment, Clara realized how far she had come. She no longer needed to plead for acceptance or protection. She had earned it through her actions, her courage, and her character. Her family, seeing her confidence and Thomas's steadfast support, finally understood that she was no longer the timid widow they had intended to punish. Their attempts to interfere had failed, and for the first time, Clara felt truly free. After her family left, retreating to their own world, Clara turned to Thomas. The tension between them dissolved into quiet laughter and relief. They had faced an intrusion together and emerged stronger, their bond tested and proven. The trust and admiration that had been growing quietly over the months now shone with clarity. Clara understood that Thomas's protection was more than physical, it was a declaration of his respect, his care, and silently his love. And Thomas, seeing Clara stand boldly in the face of her family's judgment, felt a deep pride and an unspoken tenderness that confirmed what he had long suspected. She had become his greatest treasure. The days that followed the confrontation with her family were quiet, almost serene. Clara moved about the cabin and the ranch with a confidence that had not been there before, and Thomas noticed every detail: the way she handled the animals, how her laughter lingered in the air, and the warmth she brought to the once lonely home. It was as if the ordeal had not only tested their bond but strengthened it, laying bare the depth of their mutual respect and unspoken affection. One evening, after a long day tending the land, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun sink behind the rolling hills. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, reflecting off the distant river. For a long time neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled with a shared understanding. Finally, Thomas broke it, his voice low and steady. "You've changed this place," he said. "And you've changed me." Clara turned to him, her heart quickening. "I didn't mean to," she replied softly. "I just wanted to live my life, to do what I could." Her eyes searched his, hesitant but hopeful, as if seeking permission to voice the truth that had been growing inside her. Thomas reached for her hand, a rare gesture of intimacy. "No," he said firmly, "you didn't just survive here, you've thrived. You've shown courage, kindness, and strength. You've made this place and me better. I can't imagine my life without you in it." The weight of his words sank in, and Clara felt a surge of emotion she had long suppressed: relief, joy, and a deep, abiding love. She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling. I love you, Thomas. I never expected to, and I wasn't sure it was even possible. But you've shown me that love I send to about weakness or dependence, it's about trust, respect, and standing together." A slow smile spread across Thomas's face, the first one so unguarded, so genuine, that it made Clara's heart flutter. "I love you too, Clara. From the moment you arrived, I didn't realize it, but you've become my greatest treasure." More than this land, more than the solitude I once cherished. It's you. The confessions hung in the air, unbroken by hesitation or doubt. For the first time, both of them allowed themselves to fully acknowledge the depth of their feelings. The bond that had begun as mutual respect and necessity had blossomed into love, rooted in shared trials, admiration, and trust. They leaned into each other, hands intertwined, feeling the quiet power of their connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cabin in golden shadows, Clara and Thomas knew that their lives had forever changed. No longer widow and reclusive cowboy, they were partners in every sense, bound not by circumstance or obligation, but by choice and heart. The journey that had begun as punishment had led them to a love neither had anticipated, yet both had earned. The months that followed marked the true beginning of Clara and Thomas's life together. The cabin, once a place of uncertainty and harsh labor, had transformed into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and shared purpose. Clara moved with ease among the animals in the fields, her hands skilled, her confidence unwavering. Thomas, once solitary and guarded, had softened, his days now brightened by her presence and her laughter echoing across the plains. Together they worked the land with a rhythm born of partnership. Clara tended the garden and helped care for the livestock, while Thomas managed the fences, repairs, and the demanding tasks that the ranch required. Each day, they discovered new ways to complement one another, Clara's compassion and insight balancing Thomas's practicality and strength. Their bond, forged in adversity, had grown into a steady, enduring love, evident in the smallest gestures, sharing the last piece of bread, a hand brushed against the other while mending fences, quiet conversations by the fire. The hardships of frontier life continued, storms, demanding chores, and the occasional threat from nature, but Clara and Thomas faced them together. No longer did Clara feel vulnerable or alone, and Thomas no longer felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him. Instead, they approached each challenge as a team, relying on trust, respect, and love to guide them through every trial. Their mutual admiration had blossomed into deep, unwavering devotion. Evenings were spent together on the porch, watching the sun set across the endless plains. Clara would rest her head against Thomas's shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and feeling the peace that had eluded her for so long. Thomas, once wary of closeness, had grown protective and tender, his affection for Clara evident in every glance and touch. They spoke of dreams, plans for the future, and a life they would continue to build side by side. Clara's family, once intent on punishing her, came to see the transformation. Though they had not fully understood her choices, they could not deny the happiness and strength she had gained. Clara no longer sought their approval. She had found her place, her purpose, and her partner in Thomas. The woman who had been sent away as a punishment had become a beacon of love, resilience, and joy, a treasure in every sense of the word. As the seasons changed and the ranch flourished under their care, Clara and Thomas discovered that life's greatest blessings often came from the most unexpected beginnings. What had started as exile and humiliation had grown into a partnership grounded in mutual respect, trust, and a love deeper than either had imagined. Side by side, they faced the future with hope, courage, and the knowledge that they had found in each other a home, a family, and a love that would endure forever.